G'day people, I'm Sharon and welcome to my channel. For those people who don't want to sit through a very long video on why to choose what for their sewing machine, although I would really recommend that you do watch all the way through to the end, here are the things that a beginner will find really useful in a sewing machine. First, get a full-size machine. You wouldn't buy a toy vacuum cleaner. Toy sewing machines are very limited in what they can do, and they provide a lot of frustration for people trying to use them. For somebody who's really new to sewing, get one that has got default settings on the stitch width and length, and that means getting an electronic machine which, when you choose a stitch, will automatically set those things for you. You don't have to think about it, the machine does it for you. In order to use our current fabrics, particularly the stretchy ones, it's a good idea to get foot pressure adjustment on your machine. This allows you to set how hard the foot is pressing on your fabric, and that is really important if you're going to use a stretchy fabric, that you're not pressing on it too hard and stretching the fabric as you sew. Try to get a machine that has got a really nice buttonhole, preferably one that it does almost on its own. Buttonholes can be really frustrating for people who are new to sewing, and if you have a machine that does it for you, it really makes a difference. A needle up down is a toggle switch that moves your machine from the very beginning of the stitch to halfway through and back to the very beginning of the next stitch. If you use them consistently, it will make your sewing much less likely to knot up, and you won't start out with your machine unthreading its needle for you. Most sewing machines now do include a needle threader. If your arms are no longer long enough for you to thread your needle, there is a separate needle threader you can buy, and I will try and link up there to my video about how to use them. A start-stop button allows you to set your machine up to wind a bobbin, get it started, and then press the button and go away and do something else while it does it for you. If you have a lock stitch, by pressing that button the machine will do several stitches in the one spot, locks off for you, and you don't have to take the threads to the back and tie them off. All of these features would be included in a machine like Janomi's DC 6050, which I will link to my playlist up there. For those of you willing to watch a bit further, let's talk about the 4 different kinds of sewing machines. And I'm going to refer to them in terms of cars, because I think people can understand cars perhaps better than sewing machines if you've not got a lot of experience with sewing machines. Firstly, we have the manuals. They are the sewing machine equivalent of an older car that is a stick shift. There is no air conditioner, and there is no electric windows or radio or anything else in there. It's very, very basic. The next group of machines are the electronics. These are the sewing machine equivalent of a Toyota Corolla. It's fully automatic, it's got electric windows, it's got a radio and an air conditioner. It's quite a reasonable car to drive, and that is why for most people who are new to sewing I would be recommending that level of machine. Above that we have the computerized machines. These are much nicer to drive. They have got a lot more of the fun stuff in them that you will enjoy using, but perhaps some of it is not totally necessary. They're a bit bigger, they've got a bit more power. Within this group there are machines that are the equivalent of 4-wheel drives. They're heavier duty, they do a really good job on the heavy, large stuff, but you could still drive a 4-wheel drive around the city. And finally, we've got some special use machines. Not very many of them in the domestic range, but these are the kinds of things that have one function and one function only. They tend to do that function really super well. Perhaps you could consider them to be the sewing machine equivalent of a drag car. So let's have a look at what each of these groups does. The manual machines all require you to use knobs and sliders when you're setting things. So they are physical things that you have to do. The very, very most basic ones, you don't get any control at all over what the stitches are like. You can just choose a stitch. Short, medium and long straight stitch, small, medium and large zigzag, a 4-step buttonhole, and that's about it. So you don't get a lot of range of what you can do. The other thing to remember is these machines have very few feed dogs, so the bit that's actually moving the fabric along is not very much, and that means they can't do things that are heavy. They don't have any control over how much foot pressure there is, and they're really very, very basic machines. The next group of machines in the manual range are not much different, except that they give you control over the width of your zigzags and the length of each of your stitches. They usually also, in the length part of the stitch control, have a thing that says SS, which means stretch stitch, and that gives you some forward and backward motion during the stitches. They're usually not terribly more expensive than the one below them, and it's probably worth going there just so that you get that stretch stitch option. These machines are in the lightweight small sector of the market. They don't have strong motors and they don't have a lot of feed dogs, so they really can't do heavyweight stuff. At the top end of the manual range, there is in Janome a machine called a 3018 LE, and I'm going to be doing a series of tutorials on it very shortly. This machine is actually more expensive than the cheapest of the electronics, and the reason is it is a much more robust machine. This is the machine, if you came to me and said, I want to sew horse blankets, I'd say get a 3018 LE. Why? All the componentry in it is much stronger, the motor is much stronger, and I know that these machines will last for upwards of 20 years. It is not as good at a buttonhole. You have to set the width and length of all your stitches, but in terms of it being a really robust machine, it's brilliant. When you move into the electronic machines, the price actually goes down, and quite considerably in some cases. This is a bit like buying a car that's got a few little bits and pieces on it, so it's got electric windows and it's an automatic, but it's a really small car and you can't put very many people in it and it won't go fast and it might struggle to get up a hill. So it's got more of the pretty stuff without the grunt. At this stage you'll probably get a very nice buttonhole, remembering you've now gone down in the strength of the parts and the motor. You've probably also gone down in how many feed dogs are there. So where do we get to now? Well, about here is when I tell you what machine I would recommend for most people when they're starting out sewing. I'm partway through doing a series on Janome's DC6050. The other brands will have something similar. Link up there to the playlist. Because these machines are electronic, they actually have more power. So even when they're only doing one stitch, they can go through a lot of layers of fabric. So they work better even than the more expensive manual machines. As you go up through the electronic range, once you get to the full-sized machines, because they do in the electronics have some slightly smaller ones, and they're the weaker ones, when you get up to the regularly sized machines, the predominant thing that gets added to them is more stitches. And whether that works for you or not depends on what kind of sewing you want to do. If you're just going to be doing utility stitching, then extra stitches doesn't make a lot of difference. One of the really nice things that you can get on some of these machines is an alphabet. And I know a lot of people will go, well, what would I use that for? I found it really helpful for putting my children's name in their clothes and putting it at the back of their pair of pants so that their father didn't put their clothes on them back to front. If you perhaps have an elderly parent who's going into care and all of their clothing needs to have their name on it, putting their name on a 1-inch wide piece of tape and stitching it on there is a good way to get through it. Some of these machines also have scissors built in now, which means you don't actually have to have your scissors at the machine with you. One of the great things about electronic machines is that if you use the needle up down button properly all the time The machine should never unthread itself when you start to sew. Next, we move into the higher end machines, the computerized ones. These ones will also have alphabets, but the way the screens are organised, they're much bigger and it's easier for you to see what you have programmed in. So it's much easier to tell if you've spelt the word right before you stitch it out. They've also got lots of decorative stitches. These machines are designed sometimes to make it easier for you to quilt. In this range there are a few that I would consider to be the off-road vehicles of the sewing world. They're heavier weight, they often don't have a free arm, but they are really good for doing quilts and things like that because they are bigger in the harp space. These are the sorts of machines, like a four-wheel drive, you can drive them around the city. These ones you can do regular sewing on, but they are really made for doing the heavier duty stuff. Top-end machines sometimes include embroidery as part of what they do. I'll talk about embroidery machines in a different video. Straight stitch only machines are specialised. Here I'm talking about the bigger machines that have a bigger harp space, so they're easier to get a quilt in, and these machines are very strong internally. Often their needle is put in sideways and they can't do a zigzag or anything else, only straight stitch. But if you have to sew through leather, they go through it like a knife through butter. Really, really good at what they do, but limited in how many things they do. You can see that the different price points, the different kinds of machines are used for different things. And that's why people like me end up with multiple machines that do multiple different things. I want to take a moment here to talk about machines that combine two different things. If you're thinking about getting an embroidery machine and you're looking at sewing machines, and some of them are combined, so you can get a sewing machine that has an attachment to it, or as part of the machine has embroidery involved. If you don't have a lot of space, they're the kind to get, because in the amount of space required for one machine, you get the value of two. However, sometimes that can be a bit annoying. In the case of combined embroidery and sewing machines, you'll have to do things like changing foot plates and sometimes changing the bobbin case in order to go from one kind of sewing to the other. They're also often limited in how big of an embroidery they can do. The other thing that can be a problem is if your machine is doing an embroidery that is going to take 45 minutes to sew and you need to do this much straight sewing, you have to wait for it to finish. And that can be very frustrating. So a lot of people like to have separate machines so that while their embroidery machine is busy, they can be doing something else. Maybe putting a zip in or turning a hem up, doing some buttonholes, all sorts of things you could be doing while that embroidery machine is busy. So what does this tell you about what you should buy? I don't know, because I don't know your particular situation. It is preferable to have a dealer somewhere near you who can help you. If something goes wrong, often a trip to the dealer will sort the problem out in a few minutes. If you don't have that option, then you have to work at it harder yourself. And I can't tell you what the things are that you want to sew. Next time, I'm going to be looking at overlockers and cover stitch machines, why you would buy one and what they do. See you next time.